Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We've got a couple more people coming in. And as we're beginning, I'm going to walk you through how to get to the materials we're going to be using today. So here we go. On the performance assessment guide, we're going to be looking at cycle 2 today. The materials we're going to use in this webinar, this workshop, are for cycle 2, and they are for single subject, but the materials are essentially the same. The difference for multiple subject candidates is that you will need to choose either a literacy or a math focus for your submission, for if you're multiple subject. And if you'll notice on the slide, the red arrow points to something that says version 4.1. And that is how you know what version of the guide you're using and whether it's current. Right now, we're on version 4.1 in the guide. There's going to be a link in the chat. And there it is for you to click on, please, and access the single subject cycle 2 guide. When you click on that and it uploads, it comes onto your screen, you'll then need to download it. And then it will be, that will be how we will use it today. Please let us know if you have any trouble accessing that. Okay.
Is it supposed to be in the chat?
Yes, the link is in the chat.
I'll put it in again.
Oh, sure. There we go. And please remember, once you click that, please download it, and then that will be the version that has the page numbers correct and all.
Can you put the multiple subject one in there as well?
We don't have that on a Google file or Google Doc right now, but
and again, they're very much the same. The difference for multiple subject is this: that you're choosing a literacy or math focus for your submission, for your lesson plan. Okay. All of the cycle 2 templates for the CalTPA are version 4.0, except for part K, which is version 4.1. You can see there on the screen, it shows you where the red circles towards the bottom show you the version number. They also will show you the maximum number of pages that you can submit for each template. Next slide, please. Okay. That bottom, those the red circles, circles at the bottom, there it is kind of enlarged. It shows you how many pages the template is. So part A is 2 pages. This is page 1 of 2. And 4 pages maximum is what you can submit. Okay, and then for part K, apply, it's a 2-page template, 7 pages maximum that you can submit. Has anyone had trouble accessing the materials? If so, please just send a message in the chat. Yes, for elementary, it is language arts or math focused, the opposite of what you did for cycle 1. Okay, for single subject, that does not apply.
the templates are not linked in the templates are not linked in the guide. You will need to get the templates through your registration with Pearson.
Your faculty advisor can also share some of that information with you, but otherwise you have access to that once you've registered to take the assessment. Oh, and someone is asking, will this be available to access later? Yes, it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Okay. No problem. I don't see any other questions in the chat about the materials. Oh, I see one person having some trouble accessing that link. 2 people. Okay. We will provide a link to the YouTube channel before we end today.
I just put it into the chat.
Okay, thank you. Michelle Hansen, if you can put your email in the chat, I can send you, I'll try to send you a link via email so you can have the materials. And who else did I see here?
I also just put the link back in.
Okay, there's the link again. And James Duran, if you are still not able to access it through the link, I will, and you want to give me your email, I will send it to you.
And I put the YouTube link in the chat again so that it doesn't get lost. And to let you know, as soon as this recording ends, I will be rendering the video and uploading it to YouTube as quickly as possible. So as long as Google takes to render the video and upload, that's when it will be there. So I think with that,
and I just also put in the email address for CalTPA. Any questions that you have about accessing materials or any questions about requirements, feel free to reach out. There we monitor that daily, and so you can ask any of these questions there as well. We want to make sure you have all the resources.
In the meantime, I'm going to go to my email, step away for just a second, and send this to Michelle and James Duran.
Okay,
and so with that, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, James.
No, I was just going to say it's time to welcome everyone formally and introduce ourselves. So Zoltan, if you'd like to begin.
And I'll introduce myself. I'm last on the list, but I'll go first. My name is Zoltan Sarda. I'm a consultant with Performance Assessment Development. I primarily work on supporting the Gen Ed CalTPA. So again, if you reach out to that CalTPA at ctc.ca.gov email address, I will be the person who will be responding to you. And good to see so many people joining us.
And I am James Webb, and I am a consultant with Performance Assessment as well. My work takes me to the development and implementation of the newly designed Education Specialist CalTPA. However, I do have experience with both the CalTPA and the CalAPA, which is the Administrator Performance Assessment. Prior to that, I was an induction director before I joined the commission. And while I share the same name as the NASA telescope, unfortunately, it is not named after me. However, I will take that as I can. So please know that the name is the only thing that is similar. And Cassandra, are you ready to introduce yourself?
Sure.
Perfect.
Good afternoon. I am Cassandra Henderson, and I am focusing on the early childhood education CalTPA development, and many of you see me in office hours with Zoltan. So nice to see you here this afternoon. I will get those.
And so what we'd like to do first is go over our agenda for this afternoon. We have 2 hours with you. And so we have already introduced ourselves, welcomed you. We will be going over some of our norms to help us maximize our time today. We are going to be providing you with a Cycle 2 overview of the CalTPA so that you will have a better understanding of what is required with this particular cycle for the CalTPA. I do want to emphasize that we are only reviewing the CalTPA, not the EdTPA. So please understand that we are providing information as it relates to the commission-sponsored model, which is the CalTPA. We'll take a short stretch break as it's important to do so when you're on Zoom calls. We will talk about strategies for completing the CalTPA Cycle 2, and then also discussing candidate supports. Veronica, the difference between the CalTPA and the EdTPA is the CalTPA is a commission-sponsored teaching performance assessment. The EdTPA is sponsored by Scale and is housed at a Stanford University, but many of the institutions in California do use the EdTPA. And so when you were with your preliminary program, the preliminary program would have been advising you on assistance with either the CalTPA or the EDTPA. Okay, so our norms for today are as follows. You are muted upon coming in. If you would like to speak, we will unmute your microphone. We are going to monitor the chat as best we can, so please post your questions in the chat. We will have moments where we can respond to specific questions, or if it's something that we feel needs to be addressed immediately, we will of course do so. We do ask that you keep your questions to a general focus rather than your program or your specific situation. Instead, we would ask that you use that address that Zoltan put in earlier, because we want to keep this very general. And sometimes we don't, it's challenging for us to dig into the weeds of a program or candidate specific question, and with only having 2 hours with you for this afternoon. We do, of course, ask you to avoid multitasking so that you can make sure you hear all of the information presented. We do know that many of you are teaching and it's the end of the day. Give yourself 2 hours to relax, sit back, change the form where you are now the student learning when you've been the teacher, and allow yourself to have these 2 hours to get this information. And we will honor your time by keeping you with us for 2 hours, but we do want to ask that we do honor all of our time by moderating your participation. I'm going to turn it to Zoltan, who will start us off with the overview.
Yep, so here we go. Overview of both CalTPA cycles, and again, we're going to focus on cycle 2 today. So, and this is one difference between CalTPA and EDTPA. So CalTPA is based on 2 cycles that you do separately. So you take a cycle 1, which is focused on learning about students and planning instruction. You will submit that in its entirety. The CalTPA cycles follow a sequence of planning. So you will plan a lesson or a sequence of lessons for cycle 2. Then you're going to teach and assess, and you videotape what your teaching is and your students' work. Then you reflect on what happened in relation to the teaching and assessing in relation to the planning that you had. And then you do think about applying. So that's what are your next steps? What are the follow-up that you, or extension that you need to do with your students? So again, instructional cycle 1 is learning about students and planning instruction. Cycle 2 is assessment-driven instruction. This is what we're focusing on today. And again, they both follow this 4-step sequence. Okay, one of the things that we hear from candidates is that the guide seems a little redundant, and this is intentional. There are 3 places where you are able to access what it is that you're going to be doing in cycle 2. So the first few pages, there's a brief overview that gives you the big picture at a very high level. Then there's an evidence table of the steps, the things that you need to do in there, and the pieces of the documents that you need to submit to be scored. This is, again, it's brief, but it's sort of for people who like bullet lists of here's my to-do list. It's a really good guide for you to follow. And then the step-by-step guide is the thing that you want to follow. So somebody asked if there if the templates are linked to the guide. They are not, but the step-by-step guide is an exact replica of prompts that you're asked, and those are repeated on the templates for you. So the thing that you want to do, really focus on here, is taking a look at that evidence table as your checklist, and then reference the step-by-step guide, because it will tell you exactly what it is that you need to be doing. A couple of pieces of advice, again, is written here. Read the overview. You really want to get a big picture of what you're doing with this. Take some notes, highlight. So if you have the ability to highlight, if you have a printed out copy in front of you or on your screen, if you can highlight your PDF, Really, anything that's occurring to you that you know you need to remember, just mark that up. Make the guide a tool to be used. And then there are also, throughout the guide, there are links, hyperlinks to glossary terms. So anything that is linked has a particular definition. There are probably definitions that relate to what you're learning in your program or in your schools, but you also want to make sure that you have the right definition of what those terms are. Again, just looking again at the structure of the guide, throughout the guide, there are green call-out boxes, and they give you more information about a particular aspect of what you're focusing on. Is a call-out box for asset-based instruction, and that will give you an overview of what that's about. It's really key to read those and understand how those aspects are defined in the call-out boxes. It will help in your understanding of what it is that you need to do. The second piece, and we're going to go over this, and Cassandra will go over this in a moment. All of the analytic rubrics have essential questions connected to them. So the scoring is based on what is the evidence that you have provided that answers the essential question of the rubric. And we are going, again, we'll go through that in a moment, but this is a key piece for you to really get a good understanding of what those essential questions are. So after the evidence, there's also a table, or just before the rubrics, there's a table of just the essential questions. So it's actually a good idea for you to really take a look at those and think about what is it that we are searching for in your submission.
We're going to take a look at the rubrics. This is how the assessors score your assessment, your submission. So we're going to take a look at those. Please open the assessment guide to page 33, or scroll to page 33. Next slide, please. The CalTPA is scored using analytic rubrics. Each rubric contains an essential question. And that the essential question for this one, for example, is how does the candidate support student development and demonstration of academic language in relation to the content-specific learning goal? And that is right at the top above the green bar that shows different levels, the essential question. And then within each of the levels, you'll see levels 1 through 5, that essential question is broken down into constructs. So candidates need to demonstrate evidence for each of the constructs to earn that level score. So looking at level 3, for example, the candidate would need to provide evidence for the construct that's here that pertains to the essential question. If we go down below, you'll see a note that says sources of evidence. When an assessor looks at your submission, these are the sources of evidence they would use for this step. Rubric 2.3, step 2, teach and assess. The assessor would use part G, the 4 annotated video clips, and part H, the written narrative. Okay. And then if we look below that in the rectangular box, it shows TPE and elements. This demonstrates which elements of the TPEs are addressed in this step.
Okay, so we are going to move to taking a look at CalTPA Cycle 2. We're going to go step by step. We will pause after each of the steps for to provide you time to ask questions that are related to that step. Okay, so again, if you open your assessment guide to page 6, you will see the start of this. Page 6 is where the Cycle 2 evidence table is. And then the evidence table shows the plan, teach and assess steps, reflect step, and apply step. We're going to turn over to that. And again, use this as a checklist for yourself. This is not going to provide you with enough detail to complete the CalTPA. But this is the thing that you should have, just mark off, have you accomplished each of those bullet points? So James, do we want to open the guide now? Or
Yes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the slide deck, and I am going to go and share my screen with the actual guide and walk you through the evidence table that Zoltan has referenced.
So again, I'm using this like a checklist. So we're going to look at plan first. And so there are templates that are associated with the plan step. Can we scroll down just a little bit, James? There we go. So you can see that there are bullet pointed descriptions of the things that you need to do through this. Provide contextual information about the whole class, develop a plan for a series of 3 to 5 content specific lessons. We're going to go through this in more detail on the step-by-step, but again, checking these things off here would be helpful. The thing that's also critical on that is the evidence to be submitted. So if you look over, these are referencing the templates that you will download. So for step 1 plan, you will be submitting part A, which is a written narrative for the contextual information. And again, as Cassandra said, it gives you page limits. Part B is your learning segment template, where you write out the plan for the 3 to 5 lessons. Part C is a written narrative with the description of your assessments. Part D is a description or a blank copy of the informal assessment that you are going to use to check for understanding of your students at some point through the 3 to 5 lesson or points through the 3 to 5 lessons. Part E is a description or blank copies of both the student self-assessment and the corresponding rubric. And part F is a description or blank copies of the formal assessment and the rubric. One of the things that we get some questions on is what's the difference between the formal assessment and the rubric. The formal assessment is the thing that the students are going to do, and the rubric is the tool that you use to measure their ability in terms of that assessment task that you gave them. So that's, again, a product, process, or performance is the assessment, is the formal assessment. So if we can move down now, and again, we'll come back again. So this is same exact structure for step 2, which we're going to go into after this. So step 2 has several bullet points of what you need to do, and there are 2 pieces of evidence to be submitted. So one point to be aware of is that when the assessors are looking at like step 2, the rubrics that are associated with step 2, they only look at the pieces of evidence that are connected to that rubric. They don't look at any other pieces of evidence. So that, again, really understanding what you need to include in each of those narratives or in the video clips is crucial. So again, and we move down to step 3, reflect. There are 2 pieces of evidence, 2 templates that you submit for that, part I and part J. And then we'll scroll down a little bit more. And for the step 4, for the apply, there are 2 pieces of evidence that you submit for that. One is a narrative for your next steps for learning. And part L is an additional video clip. So you have an additional video clip for cycle 2.
So Zoltan, we have a couple of questions. If I
Yes.
could just, Whitney would like to know if we provide blank copies, we don't have to provide a description.
Yeah, that's true. So you can, the requirements say you can submit a description of the assessment or a blank copy of the assessment. So sometimes assessments are really long, right? You're going to give them something extended. And so it might be more appropriate for you to submit a description there. And again, I believe a little bit earlier, it noted, really pay attention to the use of the words and, or and, or. So if it says, the assessment or a description, that means you can do either one or the other.
Okay. And we just answered, there were some questions about videos and annotations, but I'd like to hold off on that because we are going to get to that when we get to step 2. And
yes.
Landon, I see that you have your hand up, but if you could hold off until we get to a place for questions, we would greatly appreciate it. I have made a note, and when we get there, I will definitely make sure that we start with you first. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and go back to the slide deck so that we can continue.
Okay, so we are going to start on page 9, which will be the beginning of the step-by-step for step 1.
Okay, just waiting a moment so that everyone can open their assessment guides to page 9. And I'll go now to assets, student assets.
Okay. So this is one of the areas that the entire CalTPA system is based on, which is asset-based instruction. So I really love this. James has provided us with this graphic here. I think it's a wonderful way to really think about what do we mean by asset-based instruction. So if you think about the diversity of your classroom, in a more traditional in the past, to be frank, education has really looked at students who have from diverse backgrounds or language experiences in a deficit way as something that we need to fix. An asset-based instruction is really looking at everybody brings a benefit to the classroom. Everybody has rich cultural and knowledge-based experiences that are going to contribute and make the classroom a much more enriching place for everybody. So this idea that all students bring unique strengths and passions and interests to the classroom. If we are building on that, we are going to have a much more robust environment for students to learn in. They have their own personal powers that we need to really understand how to support and help them really express that in their classroom experiences. And I won't read these step by step. And again, we will be giving you the PowerPoint, but just this idea of thinking that all of our students bring great perspectives, skills, knowledge, abilities to the classroom. And we start with understanding what those are and really build from those points of view, what they bring from in the classroom.
And what I'd like to talk a little bit about is the idea with regard to the ELD instruction and ELD standards and goals that have been recently adopted and implemented. And when I say recently, I think it was 2015-16. So now in terms of education, that might be a little bit older, but we do tend to get a lot of questions. And I saw one in the chat about the ELD standards as they relate in California. One of the things that I always like to say, and in using this graphic, is that the ELD standards are not specifically for students who are classified as English learners. They really are meant to be used to amplify the Common Core. So if you look in the middle of this particular graphic, which we affectionately call the turtle, and that's actually a California Department of Ed term, not mine, but you'll see that the Common Core are in the middle. And the literacy ideas of reading, writing, speaking, and listening and language in all disciplines. Because when the California Department of Ed revised and strengthened the ELD standards, it was meant to be used for all students, not just those students who are designated as ELD. I taught 20 years English, sophomores and seniors, and I can tell you 99.5% of my students needed additional supports in all of these areas. So rating out, these areas are starting at 12, making meaning and moving clockwise, effective expression, foundational skills in the subject, content knowledge, and language development. And so the idea is that those ELD standards, depending on whether you're teaching a multiple subject in elementary or a single subject, science, English, social studies, it is the teacher's role to broaden and to enhance those Common Core standards through those 5 ideas. And in doing so, if we start with engaging, we go and start to move into the outer circle of how do we engage our students, how we are respectful of those assets that Zoltan just spoke about, how do we make courses and lessons intellectually challenging, how do we integrate them across all subject areas, and finally motivating our students with the lessons and the information that is being provided. And then the outer band is how this will then translate into what we hope happens post 12th grade or upon graduation. We have students who are literate individuals, and we strengthen their capacity to become that way. We prepare them for 20th century skills and knowledge. We ensure that they become broadly literate across all different levels of disciplines, and that they have a readiness for college, careers, and civic life. And so when we talk about ELD standards, I want to try to break the myth that we are not just referring to district identified English learners or school identified English learners. The ELD standards are meant to amplify those Common Core standards for literacy, which transcends all subjects and all students can benefit from. So in doing so, one of the questions that we sometimes get is, how do you build an ELD goal? So we wanted to just show you an example of a way that you could do that. So you start with the standard, and this particular standard is with a first grade. But if you remember the way that the Common Core is structured, the Common Core looks at a particular area. So in this particular literacy focus, it is on supporting opinions and evaluating others' opinions in speaking and writing. As we know, in first grade, there's a way that this will happen, and then it spirals its way all the way up to the 12th grade. And so when they come to my senior English class, the idea is they have had practice for 12 years with this particular standard. So if we take this standard and put it into translation with an ELD goal, we would write something of this nature. Students will be able to support at least one of their own opinions and evaluate a friend's opinion as they discuss the Three Little Pigs in small groups. Students will then write about their own opinions of one character from the story in a short paragraph. And so there's an example of how you can take that standard along with the Common Core and create an ELD goal. In just a few moments, when Zoltan continues, you'll see that there is reference to the English Learner Roadmap that is sponsored by the California Department of Education. And I will share that link in the chat, because the English Learner Roadmap is a document that I would encourage all of you to have access to, because it will help you to build upon these ELD goals and also to understand what is the true idea behind that language development that is sponsored by this particular set of standards. And so with that, Zoltan, I'll turn it back to you for some strategies for success.
Do we want to take a quick look at the step-by-step of step one?
That is an excellent, excellent point. Thank you for reminding me. Let me bring up the...
We're making you juggle screens here, James.
I know, but I can do it. I can do it. Okay, so here we are.
Okay, so again, we went through the evidence table briefly, and now we're just going to come down and you'll see here step one plan. There's one of those call out boxes that we referred to before. Again, so at a high level, you are going to be choosing one class that you will work on. Work with. This, can we make that a little slightly bigger?
I think, yes, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to Zoom. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
How's that?
There we go. That's much better. Okay, so you're choosing one class. You're going to get permissions from the teachers, families, anybody who's going to be appearing in videos for instructional cycle 2. Again, this is similar to cycle 1. Your first step for your first part for your plan section is getting to know your students. So if we can scroll down there a little bit. Again, you have a template for this. There's a call out box about transferring information from cycle 1. If you're in the same classroom, you don't need to do that all again, but you're going to document what your classes, getting to know your students on your contextual information template. So scroll down a little bit further. And again, here are the prompts for getting to know your students. And these are replicated on the template. So template A has all these prompts in them. So we're looking at prior academic knowledge. We're looking at English language proficiency, all the funds of knowledge that we talk about, what are their assets, prior experiences and interests related to the content. So again, you can see all of these prompts are really looking at asset-based instruction. Can we move down a little bit more? So again, experience using educational technology, because in cycle 2, that's a component of this, is that you are going to be providing your students with the opportunity to use educational technology. There is a call out box about defining standard English learners, standard English learners or English learners, that you will have ELD goals for any student who comes under either of those categories. And then you have more contextual information for the class. Again, this is very general: grade levels, age of students, content area. It's basically letting us know what is the class that you're teaching, whether you're in person or hybrid. Again, what's available to you in your classroom setting. Again, the total number of students, number of identified English learners or standard English learners, students with IEPs or 504 plans or GATE, and then dual language setting. What kind of dual language setting are you in? And then your topic of content-specific instruction assessment sequence. So what is it that you're going to be focusing on with your students? Next, part 2 is you will describe the learning segment. So you're going to be planning a content-specific learning segment that has 3 to 5 lessons that is drawn from a larger unit. What you need to include is instruction and assessment that is asset-based. You're going to need to outline the UDL practices that will be part of the learning segment. As I referred to before, if we scroll down, what are the informal assessments? And these are those assessments. What are you going to be asking the students or prompting them with to help you understand their understanding through the lesson? Students will have at least one opportunity to self-assess their knowledge and their learning by using a rubric that you will provide. And then you are also going to provide that formal assessment and a rubric to measure students' development on that formal assessment. So another call out box is on what those formal assessments can look like. And they can be a product, they can create something, could be an essay, could be a model that they make, could be whatever it is that you're working with them on. It could be a process, thinking about how are they solving math problems and how are they explaining that, or it could be performance. It could be doing a play. They could be sharing a speech or a presentation with a group, or they could be dancing, depending on what the topic is. one key here is that one of the things that we're hearing from assessors is that for performances, often candidates are only submitting a description of the performance. They're not actually uploading the video of the student's performance. You have to upload the video. We have to see the student's work. We have to see what they've created. We have to see what they've been doing if it's a performance. Here's a key piece, really thinking about what developmentally appropriate higher order thinking skills are. So this is and developing their academic language. If we are focusing on rote learning, that's not going to support you in getting a higher score, because that's one of the things that assessors are going to look for. Are you engaging students in things like analysis, interpretation, those kind of higher order skills that they need to be developing? Or is it sort of rote memorization and those kinds of processes? So if you think about Bloom's taxonomy, you want to be on the upper end in terms of complexity of thinking in the work that you're engaging your students in. Okay. Again, on the learning segment template, you're going to outline what those California content standards or curriculum frameworks are. Again, here, you can just cut and paste those in. Make sure that the assessors know exactly what the standard is and the description of the standard. So you want to have the full language of that particular standard evidenced in there. You need to also do the same thing as James pointed out earlier with the ELD goals. From those standards, you will also be writing learning goals, both for content and for ELD. And then you're going to look at what is the evidence that you're going to be providing and the assessments that you're going to be providing. So how will you determine that students have achieved the learning goals for each lesson? Okay. And then again, you will be providing at least once an opportunity for student self-assessment, and then at least one formal assessment. A key piece here, we're going to talk about this in a moment, is how does this segment fit within the continuum of their learning? And how are each of the lessons in the segment connected to one another so that their students are building their knowledge, skill, and ability through the sequence of the lessons? We're not looking at isolated lessons that don't have anything to do with what came before this segment or within lessons in between the segments, but how does this fit inside of the continuum of where the students are in terms of their learning? And then you're going to outline, here's the lesson activities. This is what the students are going to be doing. You're also going to name instructional strategies that you're using, any grouping strategies, and again, English language development strategies and academic language development. What are you going to do to address that to make sure that students are developing in both those areas? What are the adaptations that you're going to think about for students who may need additional adaptations or additional support? And then finally, what are the resources and materials you're going to do to support learning? Scroll down a little bit further. Again, we've referenced it before, but here you're going to have detailed descriptions of your assessments. So again, what are the students going to be doing? And what are the tools, rubrics that you're going to be using to assess their performance? Again, pay attention to the call-out box. This is giving some very specific instructions for labeling those documents. Again, the informal assessment is what are you going to do? What do you plan to do through the lesson sequence or the learning sequence that helps you understand what the students know and can understand, and to be able to provide them within the moment feedback based on that assessment that you're giving them. So you're either going to shift your instruction based on that informal assessment, or you're going to provide students within the moment feedback. And one of the video clips is going to ask you to do that, document that and so that we can see that in the video, in one of the video clips. Again, as a general rule for CalTPA, be specific in all your writing. Don't assume that the assessors will interpret what you're saying, but really just be clear and specific so that they know that you are outlining what, and you're being deliberate and thoughtful in your planning. Again, student self-assessment, you're going to have a rubric that's connected with that, and the students are going to be looking at their performance in terms of what they're learning, what they're working on, and they are going to assess themselves. We'll get into that a little bit on in step 2. And then again, some outlines for what your formal assessments need to contain. So the content-specific learning goals, how are they measured? What's the evidence that the students are going to provide or create that you will be assessing? How does the rubric define or identify successful evidence? And then what are the adaptations you may need to address for students? And then here we have evidence to be submitted. As we talked about before in the evidence table, you have parts A through F with page limits. Some of them don't have page limits. One of the things we do encourage is be thoughtful for the assessor. So we know that sometimes we think that more is better, but it's actually very helpful for you to think about what are the things that I need to submit that will tell the story that's not going to overwhelm an assessor or confuse them. Sometimes we see submissions with multiple forms of lesson plans, and it can be a little bit difficult for people to comb through those and figure out what are the things that the candidate is wanting us to look at. So with that, we will go to James. I'm going to ask you to bring up PowerPoint. We'll be opening this up for questions in just a moment. I've been seeing lots of questions already. Okay.
I'm answering in the chat, Zoltan.
I see you've been busy there. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so then again, strategies. Develop that learning segment that is asset-based. Really document the assets of the whole class. How is the learning segment clearly built on these assets? You need to describe that. This is why this lesson is appropriate because of these assets in my classroom, student assets. And how are that lessons tied to the students' cultural and linguistic funds of knowledge? Again, I mentioned this before, making sure that those lessons are really a sequence of learning, a segment of learning across a continuum, not just isolated, unconnected or loosely connected lessons. Making sure that the multiple forms of assessment are clearly aligned with the learning goals and also what the students are going to be learning and doing throughout the learning segment. Again, I mentioned this before, higher order thinking from Bloom's taxonomy, analysis, synthesis, evaluation, those kinds of things. Memorization or sort of just back and forth responses are not necessarily going to demonstrate those higher order thinking skills. And then be specific about UDL strategies. And we have, we'll put this into the chat. It's a resource that I actually really love because it has a lot of different ideas around what UDL strategies are around the concepts of multiple means of representation, action and expression, and or engagement. So we'll put that in the chat in a moment. Thank you, Joe, for that. That was that has been really helpful for me. Okay, so with that, do we want to open up for some more questions that are occurring to you, or?
Yes, and Landon, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question. He had one earlier, Zoltan, and I wanted to make sure I recognized
Okay.
him. Landon, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So my question was about the evidence that needed to be submitted for the rubric documents. I think it's like E, F, and G. So in the evidence to be submitted in the assessment guide, it says both a formal assessment and the corresponding rubric. And I know, so if their final, if the formal assessment is supposed to be on their writing, so is this where I would submit a sample of the student's writing, the three, like not meeting, meeting, and exceeding, or would I provide a description of what the assignment was and then the rubric?
The latter, you would provide a description of what the assignment is and the rubric. And then later in step 2, you will be submitting the student work samples that you have evaluated.
Okay, thank you.
So what is the, if you're going to ask them to write an essay for writing, what is the specific assignment that they are going to be doing? And then what is the rubric that you're going to use to measure their performance?
Okay, thank you. That was my question.
Okay. And I've put that goal book app webpage into the chat. Again, I think it's highly valuable.
If there's someone else who would like to raise their hand, if they have a question, we have a couple more moments, although I'm looking at our time, Zoltan, and we have only got through step 1.
Oh no, okay. So we'll pick it up for the next ones.
Sure. Okay, we have one hand. Michelle, would you like to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you. I straddle the line between gen ed and special ed. So could you please just briefly describe how you want the goal to be? Because I'm used to writing IEP goals. I'm mentoring people both in gen ed and special ed. I have credentials in both areas, but I want to know what you are thinking that a goal is, because I'm sure that's different than what I'm more familiar with. I just want to make sure I have the distinction right as I guide my people.
Yeah. So in terms of, what you're going to be documenting is what is the standard that, or what are the standards that are the focus of the learning segment. And I like to think of the learning goal as what is the manageable portion of that standard that can be sufficiently addressed within the scope of either a lesson or this learning segment. So standards are usually pretty big. They're things that we focus on for a year or multiple years. And so, but within the next 3 hours of instruction, what do I expect the students to be able to achieve in terms of that standard within the scope of that period of time and the activities that I'm going to have them engage in?
Okay, so distilling the standard down to the essential information, but not doing the measurable stuff that an IEP would normally have.
No, how you're going to measure it will come in your description of your informal assessment and your formal assessments, and also in the student self-assessments.
Okay, but not in the actual sentence of the goal itself. Okay.
No.
Right. And Michelle, I know what you're asking, and you're correct. And it would be similar to if you were in a mild to moderate classroom that's self-contained, perhaps, you would still be teaching a standard, but your standard, you would have, of course, the adaptations and accommodations that you would need, but you would still be focusing on, let's say, a standard in social studies. And, but it wouldn't have the degree of the percentage of what would be produced as you would see in an IEP goal.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because I don't want to guide them in that direction, but I also don't want to find out, whoops, I should have.
Right. No, I understand. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Again, ELD goals. It's a very, very rare occurrence in California that we don't have any English learners or standard English learners in our classrooms. But if you truly do not have EL students in your classrooms, you do not need to provide an ELD goal for cycle 2.
But Zoltan, I would like to, if I may, build upon what you just said. Just as a reminder, if we are thinking about what is the true intention of the California Department of Education
Yes.
with the English language development standards, they are meant to be used in those areas that I shared earlier. And if we think about what is in there in terms of the ultimate strategies and exit outcomes, I believe all students would benefit from a language-rich classroom.
Absolutely.
And just as a reminder, for candidates, mentors, everyone who is here, you do have an English language authorization embedded into your credential. And so there is the understanding with the commission and with your credential that you display and demonstrate those abilities to teach all students, and especially our students who are language learners.
So we have a
There's
question
another
about
question,
if you-
James. Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
I'm going to put in a document for that for for those candidates who are in situations where they are teaching in a dual immersion. So there is a document that I just put into the chat that is from CalTPA. We did a lot of work last year in working with a variety of different individuals from across the state with how the ELD standards can be incorporated into a dual immersion program, especially when it comes to translanguaging and understanding the basis of building upon literacy concepts and goals. So I just put that document into the chat. Okay, so Zoltan, move forward.
I think so. We will turn that over to Cassandra. Oh, I'm sorry, student self-assessment. We're going to go through this quickly because we are going to provide you with this PowerPoint. Again, we really, student self-assessment has to be rubric based. So we want to make sure that you are not doing sort of a feelings rubric. We see this often with younger students. Younger students are capable of understanding the content of a rubric if it's supported in terms of how we work with them. So feelings, think about how they feel about their work is not a rubric. So we go to the next slide. We have these amazing graphics that tell you this is not what you want to be doing, not considered a rubric. Next. Checklists. Checklists are super helpful in helping students and you guide through work and thinking about what are the requirements. We're suggesting you use the evidence table as a checklist, but it is not a rubric because it does not have levels of performance across it. So again, use this as a strategy in your classroom to support students, but this will not count for a rubric in your submission. And our amazing graphics here. So here is an example of a middle school example. This was from an actual candidate. This is an example of a pretty strong rubric. So what we have, similar to the rubrics in CalTPA, is that you have the dimensions of learning or outcomes down the left column. So in writing an essay, there's aspects of opinion, text evidence, and quantity and quality of evidence. And then you have 3 levels of performance: proficient, basic, and emerging, with descriptors of what that level of performance looks like. This is critical for a rubric to be counted as a rubric under CalTPA. Again, checklists are great. You can actually turn a checklist into a rubric pretty easily, but by adding those descriptors of performance. So if we go to the next one, for young students, some people, we get a lot of comments that, I teach kindergarten and they don't know how to use a rubric. A couple of things with this. With a younger child, you're going to have much more simple language and much more simple rubric. So I would not necessarily encourage you to have multiple outcomes listed in one rubric with a kindergarten child, but they can, with support with reading, again, there's nothing that says they have to be able to read the rubric independently. with younger children, everything is a literacy event. So you can guide them through understanding how to make sense of the rubric. Again, simplify it for younger children in terms of language and in terms of structure. But still on this one, you still have those levels of performance that a student can say, yes, I can do that. And so that means I am at the I need some help level. Okay, so a few additional guidelines. In the video that we'll get it to in the next step, you're going to be demonstrating students, you modeling the rubric and students using the rubric. This is in a 5-minute video. A couple of things to keep in mind. You do not need to model the entire rubric. You can model a portion of the rubric with them, and the students can assess themselves on a portion of the rubric. It doesn't have to be the whole piece. You can pull out a piece of that instruction that you do with them. I would say it's not necessarily strong teaching to give any age student a very comprehensive rubric and then say use it immediately. It's much better to help them understand the components. And again, as I stated before, you can support students in reading and comprehending the rubric as they're using it. They do not have to be reading it independently. Here for that video clip and for the narrative that accompanies it, we'll be getting into this in a moment, but here's some tips for rubric 2.6. You want to spend some time in the video modeling a portion of the rubric and how to use it with your students. You will have one or more students assess their learning using the entire thing or a portion. And then you're going to be providing them feedback that's based on how they assess themselves in the rubric with the rubric. So here's some examples of how that might look. And for version 4.1, you don't have to necessarily demonstrate that in the video. You can provide evidence of the feedback that you provided students in Part H narrative. And so that's a change from years past, but it allows you a little bit more time in the 5-minute video for your modeling of the rubric and students using it. Okay.
I'm wondering, Zoltan, since we went ahead and answered some questions,
I think
if we can move forward because I'm getting nervous
Yes.
about time.
yes. thank
Sorry.
you.
Okay, step 2, teach and assess. Please scroll to page 16 in your assessment guide. And this is a section everyone was asking about earlier. That includes the video clips. So we're going to talk about that. Next slide, please. Again, we're on page 16. So for video clip 1, these are strategies for success. You want to be sure that your video clip demonstrates you engaging with students in academic language development, thinking about that language that is tied to the content areas. Okay. In video clip 2, you should be using educational technology to enhance, improve, and or demonstrate knowledge, skills, and abilities. And this is questioned a lot. What you are looking for is not just some kind of app for students to access. You are looking for ways to use technology that increases content knowledge and encourages critical thinking. And there are going to be some more examples on the next couple of slides, so we will delve a little deeper into that. For video clip 3, you want to demonstrate how you engage students in learning and provided in the moment actionable feedback to the students and adjusted your instruction in the moment as necessary. So that goes back to the feedback you're going to give students on their self-assessment and how you're going to adjust instruction to meet their needs. Video clip 4. You're going to demonstrate yourself engaging students in rubric-based self-assessment. You're going to review the use of the rubric, have one or more students use that rubric, and provide feedback on the self-assessment. And the feedback can be documented in the narrative. You can complete part H. Okay. On the next couple slides, we're going to talk about the educational technology piece a little more. So focus your planning on active verbs that point to higher level thinking. So you want to think about design. Can the students design something? Formulate, analyze, calculate, integrate, manipulate, categorize, modify. Those are the kinds of things you want to think about when you're planning your technology piece for this assessment and how you're going to use it in the classroom. Just some examples. Some further examples for educational technology use to enhance, improve, and/or demonstrate knowledge, skills, and abilities. Maybe students can create content-specific videos or content-specific music videos. You could tour art museums online and have students compare and contrast exhibits. You could have them organize information or concepts graphically and then rearrange them as new information is learned. You could have them use digital tools to create books or magazines, workshop photographs, or some kind of media artwork, and then explain. You could have students use technology to assist with an analysis, graphing calculators, spreadsheets. You could use technology to have them collaborate with other students and document their work. So there are lots of ways that you can use educational technology to enhance their knowledge base in the content areas. It is not just logging into an app. Questions for part two? Did you want to take questions here, James, or do we need to keep moving?
No, I think we're in a place where we could take
Okay.
some questions. If you'd like to raise your hand in virtual hand in the participant list. Somebody did ask a question in the chat. I'll go ahead and put this out there while we're waiting. In a dual immersion class, can use of technology be them using an online dictionary? I would say it's how you're using the online dictionary. If you're using the online dictionary the way that you would use a regular traditional dictionary where they're looking at words and writing, definitions or putting, forward definitions, it would be no different than using, like I said, a traditional dictionary. However, if the students are utilizing the online dictionary to assist each other, to find other words that they could use, perhaps instead of the English word, or ways that it will, as if we go back to this list here, to enhance, to help them formulate different words, generate different meanings. Again, it's the way that they're utilizing the technology. We've had some people or some candidates ask us about, certain apps, such as, and I see some of them are in the chat. But if you're using quizzes to just ask questions and students respond, again, that is very similar to a worksheet. But if students develop the questions on their own and they are quizzing each other, that's a more effective use of technology and shows different ways that they can utilize it that's in this list. So again, it's active use of technology to enhance or augment their understanding of content. Okay, we do have a hand raised. Jennifer, if you would like to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Hi, I had a few questions about the video itself. Is now a good time to ask, or should I wait until?
No, this is fine because we are on step 2. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, and so for the videos that we're recording, if I'm teaching with distance learning, are students expected to have their cameras on, or should they have it off with a different name instead of their actual full name?
We are actually going to be talking about online learning situations. So I think we'll be able to answer your question when we get to that segment after we go through all the steps.
Okay, got it.
Because we do have it included, because we do know that there are situations that many of our candidates could be in a learning distance classroom. So we did want to make sure we acknowledge that.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. And another question I saw in the chat before I get to our next hand raised is about technology with younger children. I want to just let everyone know that if you go to that website, or excuse me, the playlist that I put into the chat, the CalTPA YouTube playlist, and I'll put it into the chat again. We do have a webinar that was done with a educational technology specialist from the Newhall School District in Southern California, all on how to utilize technology with primary grades. So just wanted to point everyone to that if you would like to be able to utilize some ideas, we would definitely have that. Okay, so our next question, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Please forgive me if I don't. Moki, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, so my question is in regards to the technology piece. So I'm a math teacher. During the bulk of the class, all my students are at boards working on problems. So there's not a whole lot of use of technology because they're at the boards the whole time. Does that mean I have to try to figure out how to structure a time piece where they sit down and come away from instruction in order to use technology, or because it's kind of outside of the normal teaching day for me?
What I would say to help you is that, and there was a great suggestion that somebody put on. Have you ever used Jamboard on Google?
Yeah, but that part of the problem is I'm going through this building a thinking classroom in mathematics, and the whole part of that is to be up at non-permanent whiteboards the whole time, which it takes. If I'm having them do technology, then that puts them back to working solitary and not as groups, doing that higher order thinking at the board. Mm-hmm. So the Jamboard doesn't really work with this style. So in order for me to get technology in, that means then when I give check for understanding questions near the end of the period, I have to figure out a way to incorporate technology during that time.
Okay, I think for your question, we're going to need a little bit more time. So we'll stay on at the end. And also we do have candidate office hours that we're going to show when we get towards the end. I would encourage you to either stay on a little bit and we can answer your question, or perhaps come to our office hours, because I think we need to explore a few more ideas in order to fully respond to your question.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So with that, what I'm going to do is have us move forward. I would like for everyone to open your assessment guide to page 21. And while you're doing that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go to the assessment guide so that we can follow along together. And I am going to speak to you with regard to reflection and the piece that goes along with what candidates are being asked to do in step 3. Please forgive me that I'm scrolling through. Okay, so here we are at step 3. So again, we're on page 21, or scroll to that section in your guide. So in step 3, reflect, one of the most important aspects of the teaching cycle is the reflection on what a teacher has done in order to reach their students. And so in step 3, what you're being asked to do is to really think about your learning segment, what it is you put together in terms of your assessments, how you planned instruction, and start to bring it together in order to reflect on the efficacy of the lesson or series of lessons that you provided to your students. And so to do that, what you are going to do is you are going to score the student formal assessment with the rubric that you've provided. And then you're going to determine the level of performance of the students in your class. And there are templates where you will record those assessment results. And in doing so, you're going to think about these areas: which students exceeded the learning goal in the formal assessment, which students met the learning goal, and then which students do need more additional support in order to be able to reach the learning goal as measured by the formal assessment. And then from the analysis of the whole class, you will select 3 students for whom you will have a sample, graded sample of the formal assessment, which is a product, process, or recorded performance that exceeds for student 1. For student response 2, it will be a student who met the learning goal. And finally, student response 3 will be that student who did not yet meet the learning goal. And as you can see, there is a call out box that addresses, if you do not have the student, what you would do in those different areas, how you can provide the feedback. So again, you want to make sure that you are submitting the product, process, or performance assessment response with a marked copy of the rubric and the assessment of each student's performance with detailed, content-specific, rubric-based feedback. That is a big one that I would underline, highlight: specific, detailed, rubric-based feedback. If you are scoring items and good or nice job, again, that is not specific to the rubric that it is that you're scoring. You will scan this work into the system, and then you will complete a set of questions or prompts so that you will be able to provide that reflection. You complete the table, as you can see, the results of the formal assessment. You will list what the learning goal is, the number of students who exceeded, the students who met, and the students who have not yet met that learning goal. You want to analyze the formal assessment results, as we said, and you will cite evidence from the assessment responses submitted for the 3 students. And notice that in this question, what did the results from the formal assessment tell you about what was most and least effective about your instructional approaches? Again, this is where the reflection starts to build in. What worked? What do you want to continue? And what are some areas for additional preparation, additional instruction that students would need? Continuing on with the prompts, number 4, for those pieces, the achievement did not yet meet the content-specific learning goals, or ELD goals if appropriate. What do you need to do next instructionally? How are you going to be able to meet their needs? And then what type of detailed feedback will you provide to the whole class? And then the 3 individual students whom you selected for their assessment results. And then how will you assist the whole class and these individuals to use the feedback to revise their work and or take next steps to advance learning? So in the evidence to be submitted, you will have part I, which are the formal assessment responses from the 3 students, and also part J, a written narrative in which you analyze the formal assessment results. Notice that you do have a page limit in part J, so it's important that you stay within the page limits. So now that I provided that information, what I'm going to do is go back to my slide deck and talk about some steps for success with regard to this particular step. One of the areas that candidates appear to struggle with is reflection, but I will go ahead and tell you, even the most veteran of teachers struggle with this concept as well. We also find this to be an area where our administrator candidates also need support. And so I think what the issue is to really think about how you write reflective. And the biggest thing that you want to remember is reflective writing needs to be based in evidence. It's not your feelings, although your feelings are important, but it is what evidence do you have from the steps and also from the formal or from the various assessments that will allow you to make instructional choices and decisions that will assist your students. Let me give you an example. You might say, in the video clip in which I was utilizing educational technology, I noticed that I didn't provide enough directions or modeling to assist the students in utilizing the Jamboard. Therefore, when the students produced their own Jamboards, I noticed that there were errors in X, Y, and Z. I've reflected, I've cited evidence, I said what I did, what I could improve on, and what I might need to do for the future. So again, it's how you are looking at your teaching to provide an effective measure for how you can improve student learning. The reason that reflection tends to be challenging is that a lot of us want to think that we did it right the first time. Let's review. Many people come into teaching because they loved school, they enjoyed it, okay? I know I was the honors kid and I wanted to get everything right the first time. But one of the things that I had quickly learned is what I did in period 2 in my English class did not look like period 6. And I did those reflections and those strategies over time. This is what you're wanting to showcase. It is okay to say, I really need to work on providing this so that my students can do this. No one is going to, remember, the rubrics are not evaluating you on the efficacy of what it is you presented. Instead, it's looking at what do you need to do in order to improve your instruction? How can it benefit student learning? And so as a result, you want to be specific and not general when you're providing that information. In addition, we have a graphic that may help to have you understand this in this rubric, which is 2.8. And that is looking at how you can use the locus or the center of you and think about reflective thinking. So if you look at this inverted paragraph, we have you at the center, what you did. Revisiting experiences, going back to step 1 or step 2. My lesson plan, my lesson segment, I was going to do this. However, this is what happened in the classroom because I will go ahead and tell you the best lesson plans that I ever created, and I was so proud of. I had 15 minutes and I was done and I went, okay, what do I do next? It's okay. You have to know how to reflect on that. When you revisit those experiences, you start to examine your own assumptions. How was it received by my students? How did I provide it? Is there something that I maybe was a little off with that I needed to strengthen? And then finally, you justify your actions. That's where you're taking it to that next level. I'm going to do this when I do this again. Here's how I'm going to ensure that my students have better practice with this concept. So you're suggesting those changes that will hopefully increase your practice and develop sustainable instructional strategies over time that will affect your planning, your teaching, and your assessing.
And if I could just add on to what you said, James.
Sure.
Again, the CalTPA is built on the knowledge that teaching is a highly imperfect art. It really is. Nothing goes perfectly in teaching, or very seldom goes perfectly in teaching. So we are not looking for the perfect lesson that is absolutely flawless. Things happen in your classrooms. And so just being able to reflect on those and provide evidence about your thinking around them is key here.
Right. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, there's these little things that are in front of you called children. And many times they will not do what you want them to do. It's like herding cats. But those, in my opinion, and Zoltan and Cassandra, all of us have a lot of experience in the classroom. They led to my best moments in teaching when I was able to think about what I needed to do differently and how I can improve, as what Zoltan said, an imperfect art, to make it so that it was sustainable. So now what we're going to do is we're going to come to step 4. So I'd like you to open your assessment guide to page 24, and we're going to look at the last step with the CalTPA Cycle 2. So I'm going to share my screen again and go to the performance assessment guide. Remember, we're on page 24, so please locate that either on the PDF that you may have in front of you or a hard paper copy. And so now what we're going to do is bring it all together to complete that cycle. So in Apply, you're going to focus on your next steps for learning. And what you're going to do in Apply is you've reflected on what you want to do differently. You reflected on worked well and what you might want to work on as an area for growth. And in Apply, you're actually going to put that into practice. So what you're going to do in Apply is you're going to think about your teaching practice based on the learning segments and everything that took place in steps 1, 2, and 3. Think about what was effective, what was least effective, what you want to increase in your professional practice, and why you chose that particular goal. And then you're going to engage in a follow-up instructional activity, which will either be a reteach or an extension. To clarify, a reteach is when you had a number of students that did not meet the learning goal and you need to reteach that concept. Or an extension is you got the kids are cooking on all burners and they're ready to go. So you would want to extend or enhance their knowledge with the particular learning goal. So what you will do is you will identify your activity as either reteach or extension. Is the activity for the whole class or a small learning group? What is the learning goals and ELD goals if appropriate? What is the new, highlight the word new learning activity? Remember, it either needed some tweaking to be helpful to the students, or you're taking the students to another level. So new, not the same. You're not going to recycle something. You want to have something new. The rationale for why you're doing this, and then how you're going to check for understanding and for content and academic language. And then, of course, what instructional adaptations might you need to include in order to help students meet the goals. So you will teach and video record yourself in the follow-up instruction. So you will have an additional video that will be uploaded in this particular step. And you will demonstrate a key section, provide evidence of either the reteach or the extension. And you will also annotate the video clip like you did in step 2. And so your annotations, remember, are that metacognitive moment where you are providing that explanation or highlighting what you're doing and how it supports student learning. Avoid in your annotations simply restating what it is that the assessor can see. For example, I'm reteaching this. Students didn't get it the first time. Okay, yes, we know that. However, what are you doing differently? What are the opportunities that students are having to interact with the material in other ways? So the two pieces of evidence that you'll submit is your written narrative, where you will answer those prompts that we looked at earlier, and then finally your annotated video clip. Again, no more than 5 minutes, and it will either be a reteach or an extension activity. There is a difference. Sometimes candidates will say that they're doing an extension activity when actually it's a reteach. So ensure that you identify it appropriately. Remember that reteach is when you are going over concepts again because you noticed in the formal assessment results, students needed additional practice. And an extension is when they met or exceeded the goal and you're providing further opportunities for them to explore and expand their knowledge with that particular content standard. So with that, let me go back to my slide deck and let's talk about some strategies for success. So one of the big pieces, as we've always said, is using evidence. So you want to use that evidence of student learning from all the assessments to support your responses. Be specific. I noticed when I provided the informal assessment and students were when I had 7 students appear to not understand the concept, I could have done this. When I looked at the student self-assessment, I noted, so you want to make sure that you are citing evidence with the assessments. Remember that the title of the cycle is assessment-driven instruction. So you want to cite that evidence from steps 1, 2, and/or 3. The rubrics are extremely clear that you must cite evidence. Failure to do so will not earn a score that is appropriate in line with what is in the rubric. Plan, as I said before, that it is different than what was taught in the learning segment. It needs to be different. If a candidate recycles the same one and teaches it exactly the same, and if you think about, let's think about the logic in that. You know, if you're hammering something and the nail's not going through, if you keep hammering it, it's still going to bend. So you put it in a different location. You use something different. So you want to make sure that you do something different. And don't plan the follow-up activity before you have taught and assessed the entire learning segment. So make sure that you have gone through the entire learning segment before you do the follow-up activity. So with that, I know that Zoltan, you've been doing an excellent job, and Cassandra with answering questions, but let's take a pause here and see if there are any questions to steps 3 or 4 of cycle 2. Okay, Ellery, if you'd like to lower your hand, or excuse me, unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so I teach middle school, but I teach a block of math and science. So I still have, well, I'm hoping to have a multiple subjects credential. So I'm taking cycle 2 math. Would I keep my analysis of the assessment results to just the one period that I'm teaching? Or would I talk about all 3 of my math classes that took that assessment that I taught that segment to?
Zoltan, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so your planning is with one group of students. So you would focus on one of those groups of students if you have multiple sections.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another, oh, I'm sorry.
We have a couple of questions about, does the whole class have to be in the video? We need to see multiple students, which means 2 or more. Again, if you're in person, it's good if you can show as many as possible because that gives us a better understanding of the context that you're in. But if there are students who have not signed permission slips, then you need to arrange the camera so that they are not seen, or make sure that you select clips in which they are not seen.
And we do have a hand up, Zoltan. So Anna, if you would like to unmute and ask your question, please.
Yes, I wanted to know, is it okay to actually have someone operate a camera and move around the class with me, or does it have to be a stationary camera?
No. Actually, some of our most clear videos are seen with mobile cameras. So either having somebody come in and record for you, or if you carry that camera around as you go to groups of students, that kind of thing. The key is that except for the ed tech video, you have to be seen. So it doesn't need to be your entire face, or doesn't need to be, but we need to be able to see that you are present in the videos and that your students are present. And again, we don't need to see students' faces clearly. We need to see that there are actual students that you're working with.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I won't get in trouble essentially, and it would be considered video editing to have someone moving around.
No,
Not at all.
video, Anna, yeah, a video edit is when you've stopped, and you've,
Right.
and you're cutting, or you're adding music or animations. Yes, I did say that. It happens.
Okay,
That's an
Yeah.
edit,
okay,
And just as an example, I recently viewed a submission where the teacher was meeting with small groups of students and going around the classroom and talking to them, and she carried the camera with her and put it on the table with them. And it was really good because you could hear her voice very clearly, you could hear the students' voices very clearly, and you could see what they were working on.
okay,
And
great.
that was, yeah, so that's ideal in some situations.
okay,
Right.
thank you.
We also have Rosemary. Rosemary, if you would like to lower your hand or I will lower your hand. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So great. Basically, I was just wondering, I don't know if it was answered already because I had to transfer between computer and phone, but I was just wondering about kind of like quality of the video, like if it has to be like perfectly clear, like not even a little blurry, like what about sound, all that stuff.
We need to be able to see what's going on. So we don't expect with technology, and we don't expect you to be an expert videographer, but it needs to be clear enough that we can see what's happening. One of our suggestions is just start videotaping everything, all the lessons you're doing, and then you'll get an idea of like what camera angles work, what camera placements work. You'll get an idea for how to download a video and select a clip from it. So if you just do some rehearsal with it as part of your regular practice.
Right. And I would also suggest, Rosemary, what also is beneficial to starting that video recording right away is that the students get used to the camera, and after 15 seconds, it becomes a piece of furniture to them, and they don't want to think that it's Night at the Improv and try to get into the shot in an inappropriate way.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Anna, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question, please? And then after Anna will be James.
Hello, everyone. So my question is, I already took the videos, and I noticed that after taking the videos that some of the students are really, really quiet and it's really hard to hear. Would it be considered editing to go in and increase the volume of the edits of the video portions in order for voices to be heard?
That would be considered editing.
I wouldn't be changing anything. I would just be increasing the volume.
Technically, that would be considered an edit. Hold on, I'm going to look for, there's a document that sort of covers that. I'll look for that in a moment for you.
So Zoltan, while you're looking for that, could we take James's question just so, because we're at 5:41?
Yeah, I actually teach independent studies, which means I meet students on a one-on-one basis. But it says that, and you said that there need to be multiple students on camera. So I'm wondering, like, how do I get around that?
With your independent study, do you ever meet with your students virtually, like in a Zoom or other type of format?
Right. I do mostly meet with them over Zoom. That's
Okay. Then when we get to we're going to get into online, in online settings, and we're going to talk about that. And so, yes, you could still have multiple students in an online setting through Zoom, like we are now, using a gallery.
Right. But usually my students, another thing, my students are adults, they work. And I'm just a little worried about getting like a whole group into a single session.
Right. Again, that might be a question that we might want to have for office hours, or perhaps after this, just because it sounds like, again, like with the previous question, we might want to brainstorm some ideas.
Okay.
And not to take away from the situation that you're in, but we do want to ensure that we have the time to get through all of our information. So let's hold on to that, and then we'll come back to it and see in what venue we can provide you with some information.
James, I also put the email in the chat so
Oh,
that
perfect. Thank you, Cassandra.
Mr. St. Clair can email that question. We can directly respond to him.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
You're welcome.
So Cassandra, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about tips for completing cycle 2.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, some general tips for working in the online setting. All of the assessment requirements noted in your guide must be met regardless of the instructional setting. So we realize that some people could be online, or I suppose some people could be hybrid with what's going on, but all of the assessment requirements are still in place. Also, synchronous instruction is required. Assessors have to be able to see and hear students in real time when watching the videos from step 2. I'm going to reiterate what was stated before. It does not have to be a frontal view of a student's face. It could be the back of a shoulder. It could be a hand moving. It could be something that indicates it's a real student, not an avatar, not a picture. Okay. Instruction must continue to be based on California content standards and/or curriculum frameworks, and address cycle-specific parameters and allow for checking of understanding. So all of those things that are generally in the guide are still in place, even in an online setting. Next slide, please. Some more general tips for the online setting. You and your students need to be clearly visible in the video clips. Students meaning 2 or more, okay? Uploaded video clips must be continuous and unedited with the following exceptions. You can cover or remove students' names to protect their privacy. That's not considered a video edit. Also, video captured in an online setting such as Zoom, where the video appears to jump from speaker to speaker, that's not considered an edit, as it's part of the online platform or app. And you must adhere to, this is very important, all of your school or district guidelines in recording in online settings, recording students, and make sure that the proper permissions are in place. And we're going to move on to program supports. Sultan.
Okay, here we go. Thank you. So again, program supports. Weekly office hours for CalTPA, Cassandra and I and representatives from Pearson are there every Wednesday from 4:15 to 5. For both Cassandra and I think it's one of our favorite times of the week because we get to engage directly with you. And we, over time, we have been, creating a nice little group of candidates who share their experiences, give advice to each other, and it's generally a good conversation. So please join those. If we get lonely if you're not there. As we referred to earlier, we have the YouTube channel that James has already put the link in. Again, there's a lot of videos on there. James mentioned a couple specifically, especially having to do with ed tech. And then again, there's the video supports on the YouTube playlist, which James has also put that link in as well. And, while we're here, I'm going to put into the chat the link to a PDF of the presentation from today. So that's right, that is there.
And Zoltan, since we're at the final Q&A, what I would, I'm going to stop sharing so that we can be in gallery mode. And there are some requests for some of the links, so that'll give me the opportunity to put them into the chat. Cassandra, while I'm doing that, would you mind monitoring the hands raised, please?
Sure, sure.
Thank you.
See. Karina, if you want to unmute and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. So I got my preliminary credential and I have not finished the TPA cycle. Obviously, that's why I'm here. I was told that there is an extension that I have a certain amount of time after getting the preliminary credential to complete the TPA. But I'm not sure what that time frame is. How long do I have now to complete it?
So you received a credential under the executive order, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so it will say on your credential the time frame, but you have 5 years to complete that. Although we strongly encourage you to work to complete it as part of your induction work, because you are then supported by induction mentors, and it's very helpful for candidates to be supported both with colleagues and mentors.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Brenda, if you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question, and then Alana.
Kind of following off of that, because the preliminary was done through a teacher credentialing program at a school, when we go to submit this second cycle, and we don't have like an actual institution that we're going through, how do we go about registering or submitting that to the site?
Are you in an induction program?
I am.
So I believe there's a space for you to put the induction program name.
Okay, thank you.
Alana?
I have a question about the video part, the video and technology part. I kind of have a general idea of what I want to do for the technology part. But the way I use it in my classroom right now, it's part of a center. It's not a full lesson. It's more of like an extension activity of our unit. Do I need to find a way to work that into the planning template as its own separate lesson as part of that like 5 lesson segment, or can I continue to use it as like a center extension type activity?
I would say that, feel free to chime in, Cassandra and James, but you plan that center. So in your learning segment, it would be appropriate for you to write up a description of what that plan is, and then describe that to the assessor. The assessor will actually, if you say that this is, I imagine this is for primary.
Yes, it's for first grade.
Yeah, so assessors are multiple subjects. Assessors are going to understand that kind of strategy to use with students. So I would document what the plan is for that, and how it works in terms of meeting students' learning needs and addressing their assets as well.
Okay, thank you.
Please forgive me if I mispronounce your name, Nylena.
Perfect, dead on. My question is, the lesson for each section, you need a certain amount of minutes on the video, like 5 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever they are. My lessons, I'm a primary teacher on Zoom, or independent study teacher, and my lessons usually run 20 to 30 minutes. Is there a good tool that people often use to just, I don't know if I'm allowed to do that, or do I just teach to the time? So do 5 minutes and then what do I do with that?
It's recommended that you record the entire lesson. And then you're
Okay.
going to take your clips from there. And your clips, just to be clear, should not be more than 5 minutes. It can be up to 5 minutes. So as long as you can demonstrate what needs to be demonstrated, I mean, some people's are less, some people's are exactly 5. An assessor will stop watching your video at the end at the 5 minute mark.
Oh, okay. So do I just queue up the video, the whole lesson and mark it at the 5 minutes, or just I clip the 5 minutes?
You need to have clips.
Okay. And now do you know, I do all of my lessons on Zoom. Most of them are recorded just to make it easier for me. How do you know if there's a tool or an app that can cut Zoom videos or the little clips? Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense how I'm saying that?
Yes. What could you use to go ahead?
Well, I'm going to suggest that anybody in the group, that if you have a tool that you use, if you could just put it in the chat. Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
Oh, you guys
I was
rock.
gonna, yeah, I was gonna say iMoving.
Thank you so much. You guys are awesome.
Old school,
Ellen.
quick time. I love it.
Hi, I am a mentor teacher in the induction program, and I heard the extension is for 5 years. However, in conversations that we've been having, when they finish induction, we're supposed to be recommending them to have a clear credential, but if they don't have the TPAs done, then how does one complete? How do we say they finished? You know, like what are the pieces there?
If I can take this one. First thing I want to say is I just want to make sure, because it was used before. This is not an extension. A preliminary credential was granted with the TPA requirement embedded into the preliminary, and the renewal code PS5 TPA indicates that a TPA must be completed by the time the recommendation for the clear is made. It's hard to say, Ellen, specifically to all, you're right, the TPA, if that is on the credential renewal, does need to be satisfied before the recommendation to the clear is made by the induction program sponsor. However, there could be other outstanding requirements such as RECA or other items that are listed on the credentials. So it's hard to speak because every situation is going to be slightly different depending on what requirements that candidate may need to complete. However, as Zoltan stated earlier, it is the candidate's best course of action to complete the performance assessment within the 5 years or term of the preliminary, because you want to make sure that that is satisfied, and any other outstanding requirements that are under the credential renewal section, so that you make sure that you can be recommended for the clear credential. If you have those outstanding requirements and they've not been met, yes, you can apply for an extension after the 5 years, but you better have a very good reason why you didn't do it, because the commission doesn't just grant extensions because it's fun, because the idea is that you have 5 years to complete it. And I'm speaking as a former induction director, where I have seen applications for extensions denied because a candidate said, I just couldn't get around to it. So just please, if you are in that situation, get it done ASAP within what you have purview to do.
So we're highly recommending that they finish their RECA and finish their CalTPAs before induction time is over. But I guess my question is there somebody I can contact to discuss this, in more detail, as far as how do we say they completed without having everything done? You know what I mean? Just
yeah,
So
I would
Ellen,
recommend. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So Ellen, I see Karen Sacramento is in the group. She will put her email address in the chat. She would be a great person to reach out to. And then also first and third Thursdays of the month at 9 a.m. we have induction program. I assume you're a coordinator or a mentor, correct?
I am a mentor, yes.
Yeah.
And this is something that we're just trying to unveil now.
Yeah, we have office hours for coordinators and mentors to join from induction. And these kinds of questions are often the topic of those office hours. So the next one will be not this Thursday, but the following. And if you reach out to, I'll put the email address in the chat and I can get you the link to that meeting.
Thank you.
And
Again,
I'll also
I hope I don't.
put,
Sorry,
I'll put Karen's email in there as well.
she did.
Oh, she did. Okay, thanks,
Yeah.
Karen.
I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name. Is it Nada?
Yeah, it's Neda. Thank you. For the assessment guide on page 15, for part E, it says description or blank copies of both the student self-assessment and corresponding rubric. I know you guys showed us an example of the rubric, which was really helpful, but for the student self-assessment, is that another document that we need to submit? Because they're saying it's two separate things, right?
Do you have that one, Cassandra?
My
I'm sorry,
understanding.
I was typing and I wasn't quite listening. Could you read?
Yeah, I can repeat it. So I know you showed us an example of the rubric for the student self-assessment, but on part E on page 15, it says it wants both the student self-assessment and corresponding rubric. So I'm just a little confused on what I'm submitting for those documents. Like I understand the rubric part, but not the other one.
So the self-assessment or the,
Yeah.
so when we say a copy of the assessment, whether it be an informal assessment or formal assessment or the student self-assessment, is what are the students going to do?
Okay.
So it's a description of what they're going to do. It could be a document, it could be something, and then the rubric is what are you using to measure, or what are the students using to measure their performance?
So could a student self-assessment be like a Google form per se, or like a checklist?
A student like if you're asking them to, like, if you're giving them a prompt to look at a piece of their work,
Yeah.
You would outline what that prompt is.
Okay.
You would say, this is what I'm having the students do, and they're going to be using the rubric to assess this thing that they've created, and here's the questions I'm going to ask them, that kind of thing.
Okay, perfect. Thank
that-
you. Yeah, I think you answered it. Yeah. Thank you,
Okay,
Sultan.
Rebecca, you're next.
Yes,